After their dreadful performance in Lexington, Kentucky last week, the Gators returned home in week 6 to take on the Vanderbilt Commodores, and they won in a convincing fashion. They were able to rebound, they were able to bounce back. How many people wanted them to after the embarrassing showing really against the Wildcats in week 5? I'm Brandon Carroll here, host of Carroll's Cadence, and today I'm going to recap this Vanderbilt Florida contest. This contest that was immense for Florida's movement forward, their ability to kind of finish the season strong as they enter a really daunting stretch of opponents from now until the year's end. I mean, going into South Carolina's upcoming weekend on the road, we know how they've struggled when they're away from the swamp, have a bye week, and then you go Georgia, Arkansas, LSU, Missouri, Florida State, all of which are going to be very, very difficult for the Florida Gators to reign victorious. However, they're able to post their 4th win of the year against Vanderbilt on Saturday. And it really started with the offense. The offense was ticking on both sides of the football. We saw really their most balanced showing of the season. It was difficult because without having your two pillars of that offensive line and Austin Barber at left tackle and Kingsley Eguakin at center, you were kind of like, how are they going to get their production? How are they going to find success on the ground, which we all have come to know is their foremost way of moving the football? And then you kind of compound that with the lack of Trevor Etienne in that backfield, and it becomes even more daunting of a task. Well, luckily, they were facing off against the team in the SEC that has allowed the second to most rushing yards per game this year. That was an area they struggled in coming into this game, and they continued to do so as Florida found holes on the ground. And it really was behind the legs of Montrell Johnson. I said in my preview show that Montrell Johnson was going to kind of have his day. He was going to make his mark in this contest because he's struggled to so far this year. He's been a shell of himself of what he looked like a year ago, coming over from Louisiana Lafayette with Billy Napier and co. But he put it together on Saturday, and it was really the first time we've seen him this year produce in a form that flashed what we saw of him last year. He was running with physicality, aggression, that fervor that we saw from him, that intent to kind of not just run the football well, but do so with a bit of a chip on his shoulder, an edge that, he's going to go get that extra yard. He's going to run powerful. He's going to run like he's 218 pounds and he has that stout lower half. That's what he did against Vanderbilt, and it resulted in his, best game to date this season. It resulted in his best performance to date in the form of 135 yards and a touchdown on 18 carries. The workload that he got helped him get in that rhythm. It helped him kind of regain that confidence early. You saw him running with, like I said earlier, that fervor that we haven't seen from him, that edge that we haven't seen from him this season. And just the ability for him to kind of kickstart this offense was crucial to their success. Because we know when Florida's not rushing the football well, they're not producing offensively. They're not having success moving the football up and down the field, no matter who the opponent is. They struggled against Charlotte. They, have had their ups and downs against the Power 5 teams they've seen this season. And so just to kind of get another game under their belt where they've seen that they can have success on the ground, even without two of the, really the two leaders on that offensive line this year in Barber and Eguakin, and then also without their most dynamic back in the backfield this year in Trevor Etienne. I think this builds confidence moving forward. It allows them to kind of see like, okay, we can make something shake on the ground. But in turn, it opened up the passing game because not only did Florida have that success on the ground, not only did Montrell Johnson kind of say, all right, I'm going to strap on the backpack and we're going to move, but Graham Mertz was able to kind of air it out in a way that we haven't seen of him when they're winning. Because when they've won this year, Graham Mertz has been very game manager-esque. He's performed in a fashion that is deferring to the run, which is most of the time what Florida wants to do. But in this game, he tossed the rock 36 times, completed 30 of his passes, 254 yards, and 3 scores for the Wisconsin transfer. And it just looked as if everything was clicking. Everything that Florida was trying to do for most of the contest was working the way that it needed it to, which I'll talk about some of the faults that they have here in a second. But I think it's important to highlight this contest for Florida because it was balanced. It looked more modern. Obviously, they were working out of 12 personnel, which is, kind of something that is not seen as often in today's game. But by doing so, they saw another receiver emerge, another pass catching option emerge in Arlis Boardingham, who was fantastic on the day. Dropped his first, target, and it was kind of looking as that's another mishap after the tipped ball that turned into an interception that really deflated any type of comeback attempts Florida had in week 5 against Kentucky. He got it going from there. He caught his next 7 targets. He had 99 yards receiving, 2 touchdowns, and was really that piece that they've been searching for since Billy Napier and co arrived in Gainesville. Because you look at how this offense is set up. And like I said, yes, it's a run-first offense, but they've also just been searching, yearning for that one piece at tight end that can be a legitimate blocker, but also a mismatch piece, whether they spread them out wide, put them in the slot, inline, doesn't matter. They want a guy that can be a weapon when they're working out of that 12 personnel set that they want to use more consistently, just haven't been able to because the tight ends have been so up and down. But it seems as if he kind of settled into that role against Vanderbilt because no matter where they put him, it seemed as if he was finding the zones. He was kind of making his man, if they were running man-to-man, he was shaking them off. He was producing in a form that allowed him to get open, and it provided a safety valve for Graham Mertz, which he went to all day long. And it really was just the most complete game we've seen from this Florida Gators offense. And I think that had a major reason, that was a major factor in it being so. Because if you kind of watch how Billy Napier and the offense operated at Louisiana Lafayette, you had that comfortability of being able to not necessarily look to a tight end consistently, but they had multiple tight ends being used at all times. Florida's kind of settled in where it's Arlis Boardingham at the H and Hayden Hansen at the Y. And so you have Hansen, who's kind of the traditional hand in the ground, extra blocker that can kick out and, have a reception from time to time. Had his first ever touchdown reception in week 5 against Kentucky in that loss to, give the Gators some points going into the half. But just having a guy like Boardingham being that safety blanket, being that piece that you can mismatch, you can create mismatches all across the field, it's huge for Florida moving forward. Because now you have a guy that can produce in a fashion that allows Graham Mertz not just to be the, kind of defer to handing the ball off. And I'm not saying that's going to be their formula moving forward, but a lot of people have been asking for kind of just an uptick in the modern style of football, playing modern offense. And if they have a mismatch like Arlis Boardingham, which is looking as if it's the case, obviously it's a one-off performance. You have to see it be consistent moving forward. But it kind of seemed as if that was his coming out party in the swamp, which many people have been expecting for quite some time. We know that he can produce in that fashion. We know he's athletic. We know he has moved into this tight end spot, so he has those receiver-like abilities from his time performing at the prep level. But if he can be that piece, then I think this gives the Gators offense an extra jolt that makes it not necessarily as archaic as it has looked and inconsistent as it has looked through the other contests this year. And another piece of that, another kind of thought there is Graham Mertz had significant success when working at Wisconsin when he had old Jake Ferguson running down the seams and being that piece that he needed him to be during his time as a Badger. Jake Ferguson's now with the Dallas Cowboys, and we saw a pretty significant tick down in Mertz's just ability to target in the middle of the field specifically. We know Florida's going to try to target the boundaries, a lot of screen passes, a lot of plays around the line of scrimmage, but they've been missing that vertical passing attack specifically in the middle of the field. That's where a tight end comes in. That's where Graham Mertz had success at Wisconsin because he had Jake Ferguson at his disposal. If he can do that with Arlis Boardingham, he's already shown that he can be accurate. He already shown that he can kind of maintain this offense this season. That just adds an extra dimension to this Florida offense and gives them a sliver of hope that something can kind of change as we move forward throughout the rest of this season. Then defensively, the Gators were able to bounce back again following an anomaly performance from this unit in Lexington. And I know I don't want to keep going back to that game against Kentucky But this contest itself was an opportunity for Florida to move on. I said it in my show Friday. This was an on to Cincinnati opportunity for the Gators. And I think they kind of proved defensively that they were moved on, because the unit we saw in week 5 that was missing tackles and a step late to, filling holes and to wrapping up ball carriers and to making plays in general, that wasn't existent anymore. That the team that we saw through the first 4 weeks prior to that point returned on Saturday. That fast acting in terms of just being able to quickly get to the ball, that fast in pursuit, sure tackling, aggressive, dominant, really, unit, the top 20 unit in total defense this season in the Florida Gators defense, Austin Armstrong's defense, returned on Saturday. We saw how the front 7 was really kind of returned back to its original form. They were creating pressure on Ken Seals. They continued to stifle this Vanderbilt rushing attack, which hasn't looked good all season long. And because of that, they were able to kind of take risks in the passing game. They didn't come up with any interceptions, and they allowed those 2 big plays, really 3 big plays, to Vanderbilt. The one to Will Shepherd down the left sideline with Jason Marshall Jr. in coverage. And, obviously people can talk about how he got his face mask yanked and things like that. But that one, and then on their second scoring drive, they had 2 plays basically of the same concept where they ran a deep crosser toward the Florida sideline with Richie Hoskins. He was able to come down with the balls both times because they went empty on that side of the field, had Jason Marshall Jr. and RJ Moten working as like the cornerback and safety tandem, both of which watching the backfield. And that's something when you're playing DB, when you get to watching the backfield when you're playing out of zone, which with Jason Marshall Jr. not following, 9 times out of 10 means that side of the field at least is going to be playing a zone. If not, the entire look in general is going to be zone. But with having those 2 watching, Moten creeping up, trying to play the quarterback and play in those intermediate and short levels, it allowed Hoskins to come around the back. He dumped it over. Explosive play, puts them in scoring position. 2 plays later, they go back to a very similar look. Same thing happens, score, 14 points on the board for Vanderbilt. So the explosive plays are still a concern for Florida, but the unit on a down-to-down basis returned back to its form, to the form we've seen from it for how many weeks now? 6. And that is something that I believe, at least, is encouraging moving forward, because you can kind of say that from what we've seen this year, from what we've kind of the overall sample size, is Florida's defense is a very good unit that had a really bad day in Lexington. It's a very good unit that had an atrocious day in Lexington. Couldn't stop a nosebleed. But they were surely able to stop the nosebleed that Vanderbilt was. That got clogged up with quickness. That thing, boom. Shoved the freaking cotton ball or whatever it is in there and said, all right, let's rock. That's how it happened. Not to say Vanderbilt didn't have success. They had some success, but a lot of that success came from those big plays. You had deep hitters of 85, 52, 27 on the day. Can't have that. Those are plays that in games against teams in the SEC that aren't named Vanderbilt can lose you those ball games, especially when they go on the road, which Florida only has 2 more home games throughout the rest of the season, and we've seen that they cannot win on the road, or they struggle to win on the road. So you have to be able to kind of limit those home run hitters that they've allowed so consistently this year, and they didn't do that necessarily on Saturday, which I can say is the biggest knock for this team, for this defense. But just having the ability to kind of sit comfortably on a down-to-down basis, knowing you're going to create, those 3 and outs, turnovers on downs, and just be stout in the grand scheme of things in a game was very positive for Florida, because I think everyone was looking for that. That's what we were looking for going into this week. Me specifically, is can Florida just bounce back? Can they show that last week was not the team that they are? And I think they did that. I think they did that on both sides of the ball. I think they showed specifically defensively that was not the case. And then, like I said, offensively, they've kind of gotten a rhythm and were able to get it done through the air. and on the ground, which is a immense step forward from what Florida's been able to do really the past 2 weeks against Charlotte and Kentucky. But it's also just an overall step forward for an offensive unit that's been below average this year, if not worse, below average at best. So moving forward, obviously I'll get into my South Carolina takes later this week, but I do think that just kind of having the ability to get this game under their belt, really being their last tune-up opportunity of the season, is important for Florida. I think that they put a lot of good on tape. There are still some things to clean up. I mentioned earlier, without the two offensive linemen, you still saw some of those procedural errors that were really hampering Florida early in the season. And they've hampered Florida consistently on the road, really since Billy Napier's arrived in Gainesville. So that's an area to clean up. They had 3 false starts. I think they had a illegal hands to the face on Damian George, which really derailed that drive. And you could talk about play calling there too. Just being in a third or first and 25 situation, you're looking for just trying to kind of get some of those yardage back. Instead, they went with 3 straight screens. It resulted in a total of 5 yards, and they punted on 4th and 20. So yes, that was an error. The procedural issues are still concerning. So it wasn't all good. It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, and I don't think really anyone expected it to. And if you did expect it to, I am envious of your optimism. But I do think that what Florida produced on tape this week can be something that they kind of carry into next week and into the bye. It's kind of difficult to put a gauge on where Florida's at because of how different a team it is from week to week and how different they are on the road versus at home. But just showing some of the things that they did, I do think there is room for more optimism this week than, there was last week. And I know there was a lot of reactionary takes from that contest against Kentucky, and rightfully so, because it was atrocious. But week to week isn't, whichever team shows up for Florida isn't indicative of how they're going to carry themselves throughout the rest of the season. We've seen that they can play up, they can play down. They can kind of get sparked and get going, get that juice in them and rock, or they can kind of fall back and come out sluggish. And once they get down, this isn't a team that's going to be able to surge and come back. So very different look this week than we saw last week, which could potentially help them going into next week against South Carolina. They beat them 38-6 a season ago. South Carolina is going to be ready to rock in that contest, looking for some retribution. Florida has to learn. After this contest, they have to learn how to be able to compound momentum and utilize that momentum moving forward. If they're able to do that, I like their chances in Columbia against a 2-3 South Carolina squad. If not, it could be another not so great road contest for Billy Napier and co. While as the acting coaches at the University of Florida. So just to kind of put my thoughts into a bubble here. I thought the offense did a good job rushing the football and complementing it through the passing game. I think that's the offense Florida's going to look for throughout the rest of the season. Once those starters up front return to the offensive line, once Trevor Etienne gets back in the mix, you're going to want to see him and Montrell Johnson be that duo that they were a season ago. You want to see Johnson continue his success and continue running with the same passion that he did on Saturday. And then defensively, you're going to look for that unit to continue being stout on a down-to-down basis while also limiting those explosive plays. Just having the ability to kind of lean back on this contest, if they're able to do and kind of utilize and elevate from this game, they're competitive throughout the rest of the season. But that's always a conversation to have about this Florida team. Can they do that? Can they be that? We don't know. We don't know at this point. So I hope everyone returns on Wednesday for an unplanned show. I'm not sure what the topic's going to be just yet. I might look at Montrell Johnson and his performance in a film study, kind of give y'all, kind of give him his flowers for returning to that 2022 form and running with the, kind of, I love the word fervor, so I'm going to keep using it because if I like a word, we're going to rock out with it. The fervor that he ran with last season. He was running through dudes. He was stiff-arming dudes. He was making sure he was getting those extra yards, doing the little things at the end of runs that really made him how talented he was last year. It made him, that productive. It kind of, that was what was set him apart from Trevor Etienne a year ago. And they were both very talented, but that was what has made him the starter. Obviously, he started most of the year this year. It's stuff like that. It's the little plays. It's the pass protection. It's the being able to catch the ball out of backfield and work. Just doing every little thing at such a high level as he did on Saturday. I want to touch on that kind of a bit more in depth on Wednesday. I might make that happen. If not, it'll probably be some type of hodgepodge of topics regarding this Florida team moving into week 7 against the South Carolina Gamecocks. I hope everyone enjoyed today's episode. I will catch y'all on Wednesday. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below your thoughts from Florida's win 38-14 over Vanderbilt on Saturday. I'll catch y'all on the flip side. I'm Brandon Carroll from Carroll's Cadence, and we are